Okay, so this is going to be the discussion for the weekly rotation of July 17th. So this is all Scottish bands. So here come the Scots. We have three bands that I'm going to be talking about. Uh, we Were Promised Jetpacks, Chvrches, and the Twilight Sad. In particular, these three albums of these three bands. So We Were Promised Jetpacks has a newer release that is a bit of a different sound than these four walls. Chvrches has only one album that they just released this year, The Bones of What You Believe. And The Twilight Sad has a few albums, but again, a bit of a different sound on the other ones. So we're just going to cover these three. So the reason I picked these three bands is they're kind of unique in the either indie rock or synth pop genre in the case of Chvrches, uh, because most bands when they sing keep a very generic kind of American accent, but these three bands, in addition to a few others that I'll mention later on, keep a very uh, deep Scottish accent, which really lends itself well to the type of music they're playing, whether it be indie rock in the case of We Were Promised Jetpacks, or a kind of experimental rock slash Nine Inch Nails type sound for the Twilight Sad, or as I mentioned, synth pop for Chvrches. And I find it really interesting and unique. And there's really only a handful of bands that I can think of that really keep that accent, or really keep their accent regardless of where they're from. It just happens to be Scotland in this case. So let's take a look at the first album, We Were Promised Jetpacks, These Four Walls. Let's take a quick look here. Switch over to Spotify. Here we go. So We Were Promised Jetpacks, These Four Walls. This was released in 2009, so it's a somewhat more recent album. And this is one of my favorite albums of all time. There isn't a single song on this album that I don't really enjoy. And they range from really toned down, melodramatic, kind of soft rock on tracks like Conductor and Almighty Thud. And then they get really passionate and energetic on Quiet Little Voices, which is probably my favorite track on the album, and really is unbelievably energetic. You just want to get up and go into a mosh pit when you hear this song. Uh, I've never had the privilege to hear it live, but I imagine it would be quite an event. So let's go down the track list here. It's Thunder and Lightning. Really great opener. So this kind of introduces you to the band's sound. That is, they have about a minute and a half build up before any vocals kick in, and that's really a great introduction into how this band plays and sounds. So quite a few of the tracks on this album follow that model where they build up bit by bit by bit by bit until it's this crescendo of sound and really powerful music. And the same thing happens with the vocals, where, uh, in, for example, Conductor or Short Verse, where the song will have very toned down vocals and then just really explode with energy in some of the tracks. Short Verse is pretty apparent in that aspect. But I wouldn't say the album is all over the place in terms of um, being mellow and upbeat. It's really it waxes and wanes. So it's Thunder and Lightning. The inside the track itself, it has that build up and then the energetic finish. But then you have tracks like Conductor and Almighty Thud and let's see what else here. This Is My House, This Is My Home, which are very much quieter tracks. They're not completely calm tracks, but they're much more quieter than Quiet Little Voices or the second half of Keeping Warm. Keeping Warm, another one of my favorites on this album. And then Ships with the Holes Will Sink, a bit more energetic than is Thunder and Lightning. It immediately has this really catchy bass line that just carries its way through the track. It almost gallops you through the track. It's really uh, interesting coming off of its Thunder and Lightning. And then Roll Up Your Sleeves. This one, listening to a bit here. yeah, this was one of the slower tracks. Not And like I mentioned, this is how the album kind of waxes and wanes, where it'll take an energetic track like Ships with Holes Will Sink, then go down into a bit less energetic track. Um, Whereas the first half of Roll Up Your Sleeves is quite energetic, but it definitely it tapers off towards the end. And again, Conductor, bit of a uh, lighter track on here, but again, towards the end of the song, gets quite energetic, and the vocalist does a really great job just putting emotion into the lyrics. And then we have the weirdest song, not just on this album, but one of the weirdest songs I know of, "Half Built House," which is a almost 3 minute long track, instrumental, with the only vocals to speak of being uh, a woman reading numbers in the form of a number station. So number stations are these really weird, creepy things, which are just these radio stations that no one mans that just read off numbers all day. People think they're part of spying operations and left over from the Cold War. No one really knows. There's places on the internet where you can just listen to number stations play all day long. They're a really creepy thing, and this is one of the oddest tracks I've ever heard. And if you're not prepared for this track in particular, it's going to be really odd. And someone's car alarm is going off, so I apologize. Um, and then "This Is My House, This Is My Home," another example of uh, the track just building over the entire length of the song. It is incredibly powerful once it gets to the end. One of the most energetic finishes on this entire album. You really just want to get up and stand up out of your chair when it gets to the end of the song. It's really just entertaining to listen to. And then we have Quiet Little Voices, which, as I mentioned before, probably my favorite track on the album, tied with Keeping Warm. Just incredibly catchy, incredibly fun track to listen to. Uh, Man, that's just a great track. And then we have Moving Clocks Run Slow, one of the uh, more, I don't want to say pop-like, but it's very, uh, yeah, I guess it's probably the poppiest sound on this album. It has a great hook to it, and then about halfway through the song, you just have the vocalist screaming at you, which is is a nice little touch in there. It's one of the longest songs in the album too, next to Keeping Warm and Conductor. And that's it for that one. Short bursts. Not much to say about this. This one doesn't stick with me that much, but it's still a great track. Um, this is very similar to "This Is My House, This Is My Home" in that it starts out kind of mellow and then just builds and builds and builds, which I said at the beginning is pretty much the theme of this entire album. Which leads us into Keeping Warm, which is the king of the build-up. Out of pretty much every song I know, no song builds up as much as this. It is just unbelievable, really. So it builds for about, let's see, yeah, about 4.5 minutes before vocals kick in. But man, in that 4.5 minutes, you're just ready for shit to go down. And it's not really as much of a throwdown rock track like Quiet Little Voices is. It's just there's so much emotion in the second half of the song that it just sticks with you more than any other song in this album probably will. And then you have kind of an odd finisher. I mean, I really love An Almighty Thud. It's a great song. It has amazing lyrics, but it's just kind of odd. The rest of the album has each track has kind of a build up or kind of a theme, um, and it has something interesting about it. And An Almighty Thud is just it's kind of a flat is the wrong term, but it has a level volume throughout the whole thing, and it's just kind of a odd, soft finish to this album that you would think that building up being the theme of this album, it would likewise build up to some grand finish. I think they could have done that if they would have moved Quiet Little Voices to the end. If they swapped Quiet Little Voices and Almighty Thud, that would have made for a more cohesive theme with that build up. But regardless, amazing track, great lyrics, really fun lyrics to interpret. The the lyrics have a theme of a king giving up his throne, uh, abdicating it to a successor that has bigger plans than he does. But it really can be interpreted in a number of ways, whether it be a relationship or an actual successorship in some far off land. But really, great album. One of my favorites in recent memory, really in the past 5 or 6 years. This is a really great album. I don't even remember who turned me on to this album, but really a big fan of that one. So let's take a look at the next one, which is Chvrches, The Bones of What You Believe. Okay, so this band, I heard about this one, I think, on Reddit or Twitter, something like that. They released a track on SoundCloud about a year and a half ago, maybe 2 years ago, and it completely blew up. They released The Mother We Share, and everyone just fucking dug it. It was just a great track, unbelievably catchy. And then they just milked that track for about a year until they released another track. So let's switch to Spotify and we'll take a look at the track list here. Okay, Bones What You Believe. So they released The Mother We Share, and then I believe that the next single they released was Gun or Lies. I think it was Lies, in fact. But it is unbelievably catchy, really radio-friendly synth pop. It's almost too sweet. It's not quite pure pop because it has so much of that synth backing it. And it is 3 band members, the lead, Lauren, and then 2 guys, one on the synth and then one on the drums, I believe. But man, this is some catchy shit. It's almost too good for its own sake, really. You almost can't listen to the whole album at once because it's so in your face about how it sounds. So as I said, The Mother We Share, the first one they released, it is just incredibly catchy. You almost can't not like this track. But as I mentioned again, this just continues and rails on you throughout this entire album. So I'd say my favorite tracks are probably The Mother We Share, Lies is another great track, Night Skies is definitely up there, and then By the Throat is probably second place for my most favorite song on this album. There's a few that I'm just not a huge fan of that don't sit really well. Recover is a pretty catchy song. That's probably one of their most popular songs to date, along with The Mother We Share. So we can take a quick look here. Yeah, Mother We Share, Recover, Gun, Resync, and Lies. I'm just not a huge fan of this one. I'm not particularly sure why. It just doesn't sit well with me. Another one, Lungs. Kind of an interesting catch to it. I definitely like the track. I don't dislike it, but it's not as in your face with the sound as The Mother We Share or Lies, for example. But the reason this album is interesting is because everyone is trying to see what the follow-up is going to be. My worry, in particular, is that this is going to be a one-time thing. When they first released that track on SoundCloud, I was super stoked for what they were going to release, and then they just released a single, and then 4 months went by, and then they released a remix of the single, and then 4 months went by, and they released another remix of the same single, and it just kind of got annoying. I wanted them to release the damn album, and then they finally released it, and it was kind of hit or miss when it first came out. I had to take a couple listens to it to really get into it. But once I did, I quite enjoyed it. Like I said, there's not particularly any songs on this album that I dislike, um, but there are a few that I don't quite like as much as the others. And that's really about it. So let's take a look at the next one, which is the Twilight Sad. And switching over here. Okay, No One Can Ever Know, the Twilight Sad. And where we have We Were Promised Jetpacks, they're kind of an indie rock sound. Really, the only genre you can put them in is indie rock. I mean, there are a lot of bands that kind of they genre hop, where they especially metal bands, where they're a doom, drone, stoner, experimental metal. That's not really how We Were Promised Jetpacks rolls. They're really just a rock band. And then you have Chvrches, that is just a synth band. And the Twilight Sad, I would kind of put in the experimental rock, almost late Nine Inch Nails type sound category. Kind of shoegazy. So this one isn't quite as set in its genre as the other two albums are, but it's still an interesting listen regardless. So let's take a look at the track list for this album. Let's switch over here. Okay. Twilight Sad, No One Can Ever Know. 2012. This was not one of my top albums of 2012. I believe, if I recall correctly, top album of 2012 was a doom metal band called Indian had an album in 2012 that I quite liked. It might have been Pallbearer that year. Yeah, I think it was Pallbearer. Regardless, this definitely was a good album, and again, kind of a late Nine Inch Nails experimental rock type sound, and that really pulls through. The exception being the same thing that pulls all of these three albums together is the really in-your-face Scottish accent throughout every single track. I'd say my top tracks on this album are probably Nil is a really great track, and Sick is probably my second favorite. The track itself is really great, but Calm Trues had a remix of Sick, which is really incredible. It's just unbelievable. I put a link to it on the weekly rotation page, so take a look in the comment section, have a listen at that track. It is unbelievable. You can barely tell it's the same song, but just enough to know that it's a remix, but it's a completely different sound. It's really great. But going down the list, Chvrches, The Bones of What You Believe, and We Were Promised Jetpacks, These Four Walls, like I mentioned, kind of, I wouldn't say they're all over the place, but the songs vary quite a bit in their pace, in their tempo, in their energy. But the Twilight Sad is almost right there in the name. The entire album is a pretty low-paced, almost shoegaze, as I mentioned earlier, sound to it, which is not a bad thing. It's definitely almost an antidote to how upbeat the Chvrches album was, which probably won't sit well with many people. But it's definitely a slower paced type album. And then, really, if there's any track on this album that sounds more like Nine Inch Nails than any other, it's Kill It in the Morning. The only way you can differentiate this from a late Nine Inch Nails track is the Scottish accent. It's really they could put it on the album and say a different vocalist was on the track, and you would have no idea. That's up there for me as well with Nil and Sick. But the rest of the tracks are not really, they don't really sit well with me that much. I don't remember them that well. Like Don't Look at Me. It's probably one of the more in-your-face tracks on the album, but meh. take a quick look at Dead City. Yeah, again, Nine Inch Nails influences, kind of experimental rock. And then Sick busts out the synths a bit, and they're really hitting the hi-hat to get that 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 kind of poppy sound to it. And then Alphabet, the opener, is oddly different than the rest of the album, in that it goes from Alphabet to Dead City to Sick, and all three of them are quite different in their composition, but as I mentioned, quite similar in their tempo and their energy. So it's not quite as all over the place as the other two albums are. But that's really all I can say about this album. Like I said, it doesn't really stick with me as much as I could name each track as it plays on These Four Walls and The Bones of What You Believe. But aside from Sick or Nil, if you played me a track off this album, I probably couldn't tell you the title. I probably couldn't even tell you the track number. So that's kind of points off for me. I mean, if I can't remember the track 5 minutes after I listen to it, it's probably not bonus points. Okay, so what the hell other bands have this type of sound if you actually liked it? So let's switch back over to the list here. Okay, so I mentioned there's really only a handful of bands that have this type of sound. So there's We Were Promised Jetpacks, Chvrches, The Twilight Sad, and then probably the most popular one that has a very similar sound to We Were Promised Jetpacks is Frightened Rabbit. And they got quite a bit of attention last year, I believe, if it wasn't earlier this year, for a track called Hospital from their most recent album. Let's actually switch back and take a look at that on Spotify. Doop, doop, doop. Frightened Rabbit. Take a look here. Hey, it's Clark Dever. How's that going? I can't hear you at all. Do you have a mic?
Here, let me go. There we go.
Hey, there we go. Look at that. So I just
Can you hear me
finished
now?
talking. Yeah, I can indeed. So I just finished talking about what I liked and didn't like about the albums, and was talking about different bands that sound the same. So
Yeah.
right off the bat, Frightened Rabbit is probably the closest to We Were Promised Jetpacks, and they got pretty popular last year, like I said, for their track Hospital, which was, or State Hospital rather. Really great track. The music videos makes it even better, which tends to be kind of rare. I tend to have the music video ruin the song for me. And then the other two are Unwinding Hours, if I recall correctly, and then finally There Will Be Fireworks is I think the other one. So those three bands also sound pretty damn similar to We Were Promised Jetpacks. And those are really the only other Scottish bands I know of that really keep that in-your-face Scottish accent that pull me in on these three albums. So what did you think about them?
I'm late to the party. I'm sorry. I was actually just clicking through. I feel like I'm running your podcast. I was clicking through my email and it's like, oh, the thing's tonight. So I just rolled into gear. I actually didn't get a chance to listen to this week's.
Oh, shitty. Well, I'm blaming you then. Okay.
Sorry, God.
So if that's the case, we can talk about next week's. So,
sure.
Next week's, because I tend to do that a bit at the end of these. I talk about what's coming next week and bands to look into to research the theme. So I'm going to switch over to my other window here and take a look at next week's. So you put this one together. Say a bit about it. Why these three albums?
So for me, these were three different albums that kind of like stepped me through a little bit of a progression into metalcore-dom, you know. So Atreyu's Suicide Notes and Butterfly Kisses is one of their early albums, and they became like much more polished and produced, and
Yeah, that was like what, 2002-ish?
Yeah, I think so. I remember it, from early college.
Yeah,
Uh,
that was my freshman year of high school. So,
I graduated high school in 2002, so but I
okay.
didn't find the album right away. But yeah, so 2002. So anyways, like I thought that album was very I mean, considering they were one of the most successful bands to come out of that period and this kind of movement, I thought this was like a very foundational album
Yeah,
in
I'd agree with that.
metalcore. Uh, and like I said, it's a lot less polished than their later work that got very very poppy to some people's chagrin. I just thought they were kind of developing
What
as artists.
what album was what the hell is it? Like a bull or run like a bull or something about a bull? What the hell album was that off of? I'm gonna have to take a look really quickly. Uh,
It's so I think like in my quite amateur opinion, they kind of peaked with The Curse, which was like a concept album about becoming a vampire.
I
um,
don't even remember that one. Oh, You Eclipsed by Me. Yeah, now I remember that one. Bleeding Mascara. Yeah,
yeah.
man, that I'm just. I think the last album I listened to was Lead Cell Paper Anchor, so that was probably. Um, I wasn't a huge fan of that album, so I'd say the last one I really loved was probably. Um, let's see. Yeah, probably The Curse. I mean, after
Yeah.
that there wasn't much. Death Grip on Yesterday had X's and O's, which is probably one of their more popular tracks.
Right, right. So that's what I'm saying. Like, I think that was like when they really crossed over into like pop culture,
Oh yeah.
and became, as MTV as that scene got, right? And
Yeah,
and
definitely.
they're a really good band. I mean, I've seen them live a couple times, and they put on a great show. I'm not one of those like haters who says, like once a band becomes successful, I won't listen to their stuff anymore. Like, I still appreciate
Yeah,
them.
I think I saw them live in '04, I think. So when the hell did they just release before? Yeah, so they just released The Curse. So I think I was seeing My Sanity on a Funeral Pyre was probably one of the songs I saw live.
I actually saw them, and Every Time I Die on Halloween at Government or whatever up in
Oh, no,
Toronto.
oh, nice. That's a hell of a show.
Uh, yeah, it was a good time. Um, so then, I continued kind of exploring. Um, there was a Buffalo actually had a very active kind of like it was like referred to as the hardcore scene.
Oh yeah,
And I
definitely.
always get that confused with kind of like the agnostic punk front, like hardcore from the West Coast, but like they're totally different musical stylings, and so I don't really know how to clarify. But like it was the hardcore scene. Buffalo was really active in that. I mean, like I said, Every Time I Die, obviously a big Buffalo band, but they during this time period, Extreme Wheels, right? Like all the
Oh
time
yeah.
had all sorts of bands with swinging legs and swinging arms and breakdowns. And
Fucking
metalcore is
scene
really
kids, yeah.
interesting to me because depending on the band, it either takes like the hardcore breakdowns, like there's hardcore fans that show up, and in hardcore pits during the breakdown, that's when everyone dances crazy and swings legs and does all the ninja kicking and stuff. Whereas in like a metal pit, that's like when people rest, right?
Well,
And so
for
there's
me,
this weird collision between the two scenes when you get these kind of crossover bands, where there's like hardcore fans there that want to dance their pit style, and there's also metal fans there who want to have their pits, and they don't play well together.
yeah, that happened at Mohawk all the time. When like I remember Unearth a few years ago. There was a, opener. I don't even remember who it was, but they were much more of a hardcore band. So there was a bunch of hardcore kids for that band, and then a bunch of metalheads for Unearth. And all metalheads are going to do when people start throwing their limbs in the pit is just throw elbows at their faces.
Yeah.
So many fights broke out that night. I remember. I mean, I'm one of the ones that will throw elbows. I mean, if someone's arm or leg comes flying at me, I'm really just going to push them over. I think
Well,
there's actually.
that's it. I mean, they're just different subcultures colliding, right? I've definitely, if you're in the wrong pit doing the wrong thing, I've definitely, I've run across and smashed people, but at the same time, I respect hardcore kids for their scene. You know, I mean, like when I go to their shows, I don't dance like a metal kid in their pit. You know, it's just kind of the way it goes. Um, so, anyways, you know, Killswitch is definitely like I think definitively as far as in my view like that crossover band. I mean, every time I've gone to
Yeah.
one of their shows, there's that mix, and I think part of it is because of their heavily politicized uh, lyrics and like stance. And I don't
Right.
know if it's so much evident on the end of Heartache, but you know, like their latest album is Disarm the Dissent, which I mean, as far as an album title goes, that's about as political as you could get.
Right.
Um, the and also, you know, Killswitch has this crazy legacy. I mean, it's almost a Van Halen thing where you know you're either a Jesse fan or you're a Howard fan, right? And they went through
Absolutely.
two different vocalists, and you know it's so. I actually like them both. You know, I'm a fence post sitter. Um, you know, I think they bring different stylings to the tracks, and they've both done you know published covers or not covers, but like published versions of you know each other's tracks, right? And you know, it went Jesse, and then it went Howard, and Howard was cool because he was this you know giant black guy, right? Which is just like there's not that many of them, you know, in the metal scene, right? And so it was this very like they didn't just talk the politics, like they were very embracing and open, and you know valued diversity and all of this stuff. And he was a great singer. He was like his harmonies. Like I prefer his harmonies, but Jesse brought, I think, a lot more just kind of raw aggression to the
Yeah,
band.
there was a bunch of bands around that same time that had pretty much the identical problem. You had Shadows Fall that switched from Phil Labonte to Brian Fair, and they went from almost a death metal band with absolutely no clean vocals to Brian Fair came out and it sounded like Killswitch Engage. And then Phil Labonte went to All That Remains, and then he picked up clean vocals.
Mm-hmm.
And the same damn thing happened. So the the Boston metalcore scene around that time, just no one. I think they all wanted to get on the radio, and Killswitch was the only one that won.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, and I think you know they were lucky enough to land. I think it was like a Resident Evil soundtrack
Yeah, I
track, and
think they
I think
did.
that's what kind of swung them into the you know the public's eye. And so all the bands you just mentioned, right? I mean, there's a similar sound and a coherence to all those bands. Like you could put them on a ticket for a show, and you know you would accumulate the same fans. You know,
Yeah,
no
and
matter.
that did happen around that time. Yeah, I remember
Right.
going to a show with Shout Us Fall and Himza and All That Remains. Uh, Himza died, I think, like
Hmm.
2005, but they were a great band as well.
Hmm.
I think maybe later.
Yeah, and I actually, so I mean, that kind of brings us to the third album, you know, Trivium and Waves, and they also like I discovered them through you know Pandora or something, listening to Killswitch, right? Because it's that heavy use of vamping and you know like that style
Yeah,
of production. Um, Again, like not interchangeable. Like you can definitely tell, oh, this is a Trivium track or this is a Killswitch track, but you know, musically similar. And I really, I'm gonna be honest here. Like this In Waves is a solid album, but the song In Waves itself, just big fan of it. Like I, I don't, it's so you know, it's an allusion, I think, to oh gosh, what the video game, right?
I'm not entirely sure.
Well, no, so like the you know basically like not
Oh, in waves.
surfing.
So like things coming in waves, right?
Yeah, yeah, right. So that's basically the concept, and it's just got a really great vibe to it, and it gets stuck in my head. But the rest of that album's really solid as well. But to me, like this compilation is really just kind of a my progression through that scene,
For
zigzag.
for me, it's going to be weird because In Waves is the only album out of those three that I haven't heard because I stopped listening to Trivium in '06 after Ascendancy, um, and sorry after the Crusade, and haven't listened to a single album or really a single song from them since after that point. Um, I think I heard one of the songs off one of their albums after the Crusade and just completely put me off. The same thing happened to me with Shadows Fall after Shadows Fall: The War Within came out. I just dropped the album I was listening to and just never picked it up again. So it's going to be interesting to see where Trivium went after the Crusade.
Well, and this album also they have a new drummer in it. It's not Travis Smith. He left in I think like 2009. So this is Nick
Mm,
Augusto. Um, so, anyways, I mean, I think it has generally you know positive reviews on Metacritic. I mean, it wasn't like a runaway hit album, but
yeah,
just something else, and also because it's I mean, it was published much later than the other two albums. I mean, it's 2011. Like,
right,
it's kind of the end, or like not the end, but like you can see the progression of the style,
right.
right? So I mean, we start from like a really nascent, uh, metalcore album to after the first wave had made it into pop culture, and
Yeah,
and
I don't
really,
think there's any other band that whose style changed in such a linear way than probably All That Remains. Like if you listen to a song Behind Silence and Solitude, and then you listen to what the hell is their most recent album, For We Are Many, uh, two different bands almost. The same,
Mhm.
I think the same lineup, but almost two different bands. Um, and the same thing happened with a lot of metalcore. Like I mentioned, Shadows Fall before that. I don't know what the fuck happened, but yeah, they just kind of all broke out. And then I could talk about metalcore for hours because metalcore was my thing a couple years ago. You got Parkway Drive, just fucking amazing band. August
Mhm.
Burns Red, amazing band. Darkest Hour, probably one of my favorite bands of all time. Um, Darkest Hour is fucking. They have like 10 albums, and there's not a single song on any of those albums that I don't love. Uh, and I and I don't think there's any other band I know of that I can say the same thing about. This amazing band, and they're dropping another one on the 4th of this month, so I'm looking forward to that. Yeah, metalcore is it's near and dear to my heart.
So it was interesting when I was putting this compilation together. I contemplated putting like a hardcore album that I enjoyed, and then a metal album, and then in the middle like a metalcore album, just
Right?
so people who are unfamiliar with either genre, let alone this kind of crossover genre, could see where how the styles blend.
Yeah, yeah. I got someone sent me a playlist the other day that was like the birth of metalcore, and it has metalcore albums from '95 to 2002, and like
Hmm.
what bands built the genre, like Converge, like early Converge.
Hmm.
Well, I guess it's later Converge. They're a pretty old band, and early All That Remains, and early Kill Switch and Atreyu. So it's really interesting to see what the hell, how we got Parkway Drive's Atlas from Atreyu. So it's yeah, I'm looking forward to this one.
Cool.
Awesome.
Excellent.
But I think that's pretty much it. Thanks for stopping by.
Yeah. Sorry.
I kind of I drug you into that. I dragged you into it.
Yeah. Well, next week I will, be on time and be better prepared.
All right. Talk to you later.
Thank you. Bye.